Well, thank you for watching. Today's video, I really just wanted to discuss basically that I think that there's essentially three things out there that it's appropriate to be fearful of, because there's so many other things that, and the reason why I'm doing this video is there's so many other things that get thrown at us by the media, by social media, by panics, by rumors, by all kinds of things that people want you to be afraid of all kinds of things. And I think most of them aren't that significant and you don't need to be worried about them or fearful. And the way I define a couple of these things is that these are basically things that we can avoid. They're essentially man-made. They're policy choices and decisions that can be very impactful for us. If they happen, they're going to impact our lives and everyone we know and everybody around us forever. And the results are going to be very large and significant and huge. Those are the things, I think, if you're going to be worried about something or be fearful of them, they're really worth focusing on and discussing, because I think they're so significant. And I believe that there's three things. Now, for whatever reason, and I know there's a lot of reasons why, but people tend to see the media, and the traditional media especially, really hype up fear for things like wildfires or hurricanes or storms or something like that. And I think a lot of these things get blown out of proportion. Of course, it's particularly blown out of proportion when they're talking about climate change. The reality is man-made or a bit more natural disasters like this are things that you should be prepared for, and you can be prepared for them, and do your best to be prepared for them. But there's nothing you can do to change if a hurricane's going to come and hit you. You can be prepared for it. You can have a house that's going to better withstand the weather. You can build in a place that's less likely to be flooded. You can prepare your property to be more resistant to fires and the buildings that you have. But it's not really worth just being perpetually fearful about, especially with climate change, which has been changing since the dawn of time. And humans seem to be able to adapt to climate change if they want to. And it's ridiculous to basically hype up the fear and make people lose sleep over something like that. And of course, I think that no matter what you want to, whatever you're worried about, I think living in fear is a terrible way to live. I think it's more important and probably more appropriate to describe this as you want to be aware. You should be prepared, always be prepared. It's a Boy Scout motto, but it's actually a great motto for life. And you should strive to change those things that you're aware of that are man-made or policy-driven that can actually be significantly negative in your life. That's why I encourage people to be active and engaged in their local communities and just in politics generally, because if there's a way to make a change with where things are going otherwise, I think it's going to be much more impactful for you. What this reminds me of really is just a story that my grandfather used to tell me repeatedly. I loved listening to my grandfather's stories. He's passed away many years ago. But he had this story in the 1940s. We came from a farming family, and so like all good farmers, he had a side hustle. And one of his many side hustles was when the winter would come around, he would be preparing wreaths. He would actually go out and cut branches down, and he was preparing wreaths for Christmas. It was one of the things that he would sell either on the side of the road, or sometimes he'd take them up to Pike Place Market and sell them there, or he'd sell them at flower shops in the Seattle area. And so the way he described the story was he was up on a ladder down in the Kent Valley cutting off some boughs off of some trees, some different, probably some cedar trees. And as he was cutting these branches off, his friend came up to the bottom of the ladder that was there and told him, he said, "Hey, the Japanese just bombed Pearl Harbor." And my grandpa said he came down the ladder and stopped working, and the guy was coming out there to help him do some work, and he says, "Hey, we still have more wreaths to cut." And my grandfather said, "Everything just changed now. The world will no longer be the same, and nobody's going to be buying Christmas wreaths right now when we're in the middle of facing a very large war." I always remember that story. It's always stuck with me, because there's sometimes points in time in your life where there's a significant event that comes and everybody's life is changed all around the world forever when something like that happens to you. And so when I think about some of the issues that are really worth considering and really worth being worried about, they tend to fit that category. One of the most obvious ones, kind of related to that story that my grandfather told me from the beginning of World War II, and of course he spent the next couple years in the South Pacific. But one of the stories, of course, and the things I think we should be worried about is any kind of massive world war. And we are perilously close, I think, at this time in our lives to some kind of disastrous world war. What I am worried about, of course, is that the politicians and the political class that we have in charge has an egregious level of incompetence and narcissistic self-importance that they seem to be totally willing to throw your lives and my lives and all the lives of us little people to the wind in pursuit of their trying to protect their fiefdoms or their power base. And it's not unusual in human history to have your political class fumble into a war that is far worse and far wider spread and far more impactful than it would have been in the past. I'm fully aware that our country's been at war overseas for decades now, but this is different than fighting a war in Iraq or Afghanistan. This has the potential to be fighting a nuclear war or a much more engaged modern conflict that will affect everybody no matter where they live. And I think that if I was to pick something that we really need to make sure that our political class understands is that we don't want to get into this type of a conflict where all our cities are going to look like this in a few years. That's not a good plan, and that's a terrible thing, and that's something that would change everybody's life completely, where it's that same defining moment. Your life is one way beforehand, and it's completely different afterwards. It's why I think we aren't talking enough about this as a significant man-made policy choice that could be disastrous. And there's a lot of decisions, I think, that are being made by our country that kind of fumbles us into, or by our leadership to be more accurate, that could fumble us into some kind of unintentional, perhaps, or even perhaps an intentional war where they're presuming that they can control it in some little space before it just becomes, prolific and it expands everywhere. So I would say war, world war, and the way that we're looking at it, whether that's with Russia or China or a combination of the two, that's something that we want to avoid as a policy decision. That's something I think is worth being worried about because the consequences will change everybody's life and nobody lives the same after a conflict like that. The other one is that I've actually done several stories about, several videos about before, is just concerns about the power grid. And my concern is more of a catastrophic impact on the power grid. If you live rurally like I do, you know how to deal with power being out for a decent length of time. But everything changes in the world the way that we're so dependent upon the power grid today for our food supply, for work, for all kinds of things, for the internet, for everything. If the power goes out for a year, or something that happens that's that significant, whether it's an EMP attack, whether it's a significant attempt to sabotage the power grid, or just incompetent stupidity because the government's decided that they don't need electricity anymore, or they're gonna get rid of all fossil fuels overnight, or something ridiculous, and you do have a blackout, the world's very different after you go into that kind of an event. I don't think the average person necessarily thought through what it's like to actually have no electricity at all for a year or more. As surviving that kind of environment, even if you think you've got your hoard of food or your ability to kind of protect your little space, that dwindles quickly, and before you know it, there's all kinds of other problems. And I think most people would do very poorly in that kind of a situation. And again, I think that's one of those things. This is a man-made event, most likely, if it happens, and it's one that we should try to do everything we can to avoid. So I think it's worth going the extra mile to upgrade the electrical system, or to protect it, or to at least be conscious of how to deal with attacks on it in a way that would get it back up as quick as possible. I've had discussions about my video channel about the ridiculous amount of time it takes to build a transformer today, especially the big ones, and how at risk they really are, and how the clueless kind of self-destructive public policy that government tends to take towards us right now, very lazy, is not a good one considering the significance of an outcome like this. And it's not sexy to talk about the power grid or trying to upgrade it. It's boring, I think, for government bureaucrats, but yet it's so important. I think it's something that we should pay attention to. The other thing that you do hear about, and it's very politicized right now, is inflation. Basically, catastrophic inflation, where it's just this hyperinflation, changes your world completely, and nobody comes out of that in good shape. And I think that we're in an unusual situation because the US dollar has become the world's currency, and to have hyperinflation hit the US dollar, that would be a life-changing event. Now, it probably would ramp up a bit, and right now we're in a high inflation time. This is not hyperinflation, but if we experience what hyperinflation actually has been historically, it's more than just carrying that wheelbarrow load of bills to go buy a sandwich down at the deli. It just becomes cataclysmic because currency collapses, the economy really goes to heck, businesses that shouldn't go under, people lose jobs, careers, homes, everything just falls apart. Society is substantially damaged, and usually the outcome of that is not good for any sort of freedom or liberty-oriented perspective in society. It really encourages the worst elements to come in and take over government. So we've really only seen this happen on a local level in Germany, obviously, between right after World War I. We've seen it happen in places like Zimbabwe, or we've seen it happen in Venezuela. But we've never seen the worldwide impact that would happen if the U.S. dollar is the currency that gets impacted this way. And I don't think people have thought through the significance of the consequences of that and why that should really be a high priority to make sure that's not the scenario that comes about. So those are kind of my three things. You want to avoid these situations. You want to avoid a world war. You want to avoid a total collapse of the power grid, and you want to avoid inflation and radical hyperinflation. Everything else is something that's either personally impactful to you, crime wave, we've had crime before, you have to deal with it. An education system that's gone to heck, we've dealt with that before. You can find solutions for that locally. There's all kinds of other issues that they may impact you personally a lot, but they aren't going to have this worldwide kind of society-wide impact. And those are the things I think that are worth being concerned about. But again, we shouldn't live in fear, and I believe that a lot of people hype up all kinds of other drama constantly. I hear it all the time, and I guarantee you, if you're on social media anywhere, you pay attention to the traditional news, you hear about it too. But you can't live in fear for all the little things that continually come up at all times. You should be prepared. That's just a rational, practical approach to life. Always be prepared. Again, it's a good motto. I know the Boy Scouts use it. I love it myself. I think it's a great motto to have. And I think at the end of the day, you need to be engaged to make a difference. When you can identify things that you can just see the outcome as negative as it is, being engaged to try to stop it is a worthwhile exercise and a good way to be civically involved and to place some level of priority on the problems that you're trying to face, the big things you don't want to have happen, like World War, like losing the power grid or this hyperinflation. I'd make some of those things high priority and not let them go. I mean, really pay attention to them because of how significant the outcome is there. But don't spend your time, too much of it anyway, on far less significant things that are probably not that are more drama related and not necessarily impactful for your life and your community. These are just my thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I hope that you found this video useful. I'm interested in your comments below. You think I missed something huge, please let me know down below. I always like to read the comments. I try to respond to most of them as best I can. Don't forget to share and subscribe if you like this video, and otherwise we'll see you next time. And I'm going to close this video as I close every video that we do at We the Governed. The future belongs to those who show up, and it's time for all of us to show up.